Several green gemstones have been repeatedly mistaken for emerald, even when their internal structure is completely different. One displays brilliance strong enough to be confused with diamond. Another forms crystals so visually elegant that its true classification is rarely guessed correctly. Color creates confidence. Structure often contradicts it. Across decades of gemological study, certain green minerals have consistently challenged visual identification, revealing how easily perception can be influenced by familiarity, lighting, and expectation. And in one case, a crystal discovered in France appears suitable for jewelry, yet belongs to a category most collectors would never expect. These are 10 green gems, often misidentified, where visual similarity conceals entirely different mineral identities. Starting with number 10, ranked 10th, green apatite. The stone that often looks more familiar than it really is. At first glance, the color appears reassuringly familiar. A transparent green crystal with balanced saturation, clean internal reflections, and a tone often associated with far more famous gemstones. In many lighting environments, green apatite presents a visual profile that easily overlaps with stones more commonly recognized by collectors. The hue can resemble peridot. In certain cuts, the clarity can suggest tourmaline. And under display lighting designed to enhance brilliance, the stone may appear more valuable than expected for its mineral category. This visual ambiguity explains why green apatite is frequently misidentified, especially when color becomes the primary reference point. Human perception tends to simplify complex visual information. When the brain encounters a gemstone displaying a vivid green tone combined with high transparency, it often connects that image to familiar categories. Emerald is commonly the first assumption. Peridot is another frequent association. Yet apatite belongs to a completely different mineral group with distinct chemical composition and physical properties. What makes apatite particularly interesting is how convincingly it can imitate visual characteristics typically associated with other gems. Its refractive behavior produces a lively internal appearance that can feel comparable to stones positioned higher in market recognition. The crystal can appear crisp and clean, especially when expertly cut to maximize light return. However, mineral identity is never determined by color alone. Apatite has a hardness significantly lower than emerald or tourmaline, which influences durability in jewelry settings. Under magnification, subtle structural differences become visible. Slight variations in optical response can reveal a completely different internal architecture than what the surface appearance initially suggests. Collectors often describe the experience as a reminder of how strongly expectation shapes perception. When a gemstone visually aligns with something familiar, the mind tends to categorize quickly. That cognitive shortcut can be helpful in everyday observation, but in gemology, it frequently leads to incorrect conclusions. The presence of green apatite in the market demonstrates how easily visual similarity can obscure mineral identity. Without careful examination of structure, refractive properties, and hardness characteristics, even experienced observers may rely too heavily on color as a primary indicator. This pattern of misidentification is not unusual. As the list progresses, the visual differences between green gemstones become increasingly subtle, and in some cases, the consequences of misidentification become significantly more complex. Because the next stone does something unexpected under light, an optical effect strong enough that it has been mistaken for one of the most recognizable gemstones in the world, and the visual comparison is not immediately obvious. Ranked 9th, Demantoid garnet. The green fire once mistaken for diamond. Brilliance is often associated with a single gemstone. For generations, strong flashes of spectral color have been closely linked to diamond, shaping the expectation that intense fire must indicate a specific identity. Yet certain green gemstones challenge that assumption in ways that can surprise even experienced observers. Demantoid garnet is one of the most compelling examples. Under direct lighting, this rare green variety of garnet can produce dispersion strong enough to rival and sometimes exceed what many viewers associate with diamond-like sparkle. The flashes of spectral color appear sharp and energetic, moving quickly across facet surfaces as the stone shifts position. In smaller sizes, the optical behavior can feel unexpected, especially when the viewer anticipates a softer visual response typically associated with greenstones. Because of this unusual optical intensity, Demantoid has occasionally been misidentified when observed outside of controlled gemological conditions. Early collectors encountering stones with vivid fire sometimes assumed a relationship to diamond simply because few other minerals displayed similar brilliance characteristics. The misconception becomes easier to understand when considering how uncommon high-dispersion green gemstones are. Most green minerals display color saturation that absorbs light rather than dispersing it into spectral flashes. Demantoid behaves differently due to its internal optical structure, allowing white light to separate into visible spectral components as it passes through the crystal lattice. Historical specimens originating from Russia introduced another visual element that contributed to confusion. Certain Demantoid crystals contain distinctive internal formations, often described as horsetail inclusions, delicate radiating fibers visible under magnification. While these inclusions now serve as an identifying characteristic, early observers unfamiliar with garnet inclusions sometimes interpreted the internal complexity as evidence of unusual diamond formation environments. In modern gemology, refractive index measurement and microscopic analysis quickly separate Demantoid from diamond. Yet the visual similarity and light performance remain strong enough that the comparison continues to appear in collector discussions and educational materials. The lesson revealed by Demantoid is that brilliance alone cannot confirm identity. Optical intensity may signal structural efficiency in how a mineral interacts with light, but visual performance does not always correspond to mineral classification. As recognition of Demantoid has grown, appreciation for its individuality has increased as well. The gemstone is no longer viewed as a substitute for diamond-like fire, but as an example of how nature produces similar visual effects through entirely different crystal chemistries. And in the next case, the confusion becomes even more understandable, because the green color itself has misled observers for centuries, influencing how entire collections were once labeled. Ranked 8th, Peridot, the green gem once mistaken for emerald for centuries. Long before modern gemology introduced precise classification tools, color often defined identity. Deep green crystals discovered in ancient deposits were routinely assumed to belong to the same mineral family simply because visual comparison suggested similarity. Among these stones, Peridot became one of the most historically significant examples of how easily gemstone identity can be shaped by appearance rather than structure. Peridot forms under geological conditions very different from those associated with emerald, yet the two stones have shared overlapping visual space for centuries. The rich olive to yellowish green tone of Peridot has appeared in jewelry collections dating back to ancient civilizations, where the distinction between mineral species was not yet fully understood. Historical records indicate that several gemstones once believed to be emerald were later identified as Peridot after advancements in mineral analysis techniques. Some stones originating from volcanic island deposits displayed transparency and color saturation, convincing enough to influence classification long before refractive index testing or spectroscopic tools became available. Unlike emerald, which derives its green color primarily from chromium or vanadium within a beryl crystal structure, Peridot obtains its coloration from iron incorporated directly into the mineral lattice. This chemical difference produces subtle variations in how light interacts with the crystal, creating a slightly warmer green tone that can appear remarkably similar under certain lighting environments. The challenge becomes more apparent when gemstones are viewed outside laboratory conditions. Jewelry lighting, display reflections, and surrounding materials can influence color perception significantly. When visual comparison becomes the primary reference method, the brain naturally associates the stone with the most recognizable green gemstone category available. In some historical collections, gemstones, now confirmed as Peridot, were cataloged as emerald, simply because the classification framework at the time relied heavily on visual observation. As scientific methods improved, distinctions between mineral species became clearer, allowing previously grouped stones to be reassigned more accurately. Peridot demonstrates how gemstone identity can evolve as analytical tools develop. What once appeared to belong to a single category can later reveal entirely different mineral origins when examined more closely. This pattern of reinterpretation illustrates a broader principle within gemology. Visual similarity often precedes structural understanding, and in the next example, the confusion does not come from history alone, but from how modern lighting conditions can influence perception so strongly that two different minerals appear almost indistinguishable at first glance. Ranked 7th, green tourmaline, the color that makes identification feel too easy. Certain shades of green create an immediate sense of familiarity. When a transparent gemstone displays a balanced green tone, neither too dark nor too pale, the visual impression often aligns with what many expect from emerald. This mental shortcut occurs quickly, sometimes within seconds, because the human brain naturally associates saturated green transparency with one of the most historically recognized gemstones in the world. Green tourmaline frequently occupies this visual overlap. Its color range can fall within a spectrum that appears convincing under common viewing conditions, especially when the stone is cut to enhance clarity and depth. The internal reflections can look calm and evenly distributed, producing a polished appearance that reinforces the expectation of a high recognition gemstone category. The difficulty arises because tourmaline forms within a completely different mineral structure than emerald. While emerald belongs to the beryl family, tourmaline develops within a complex boron-based crystal system that produces different optical behavior when examined more closely. Despite these structural differences, the visible color similarity can appear strong enough to encourage quick assumptions. Under jewelry store lighting, the distinction becomes even more subtle. Controlled lighting environments are often designed to maximize visual appeal, increasing brightness and enhancing color saturation. In these conditions, the brain prioritizes immediate visual harmony rather than structural accuracy, allowing two different mineral species to appear closely related. Tourmaline's versatility contributes to the confusion. Because the mineral family exists in a wide range of colors, observers familiar with pink or bicolor tourmaline may not immediately associate the same mineral group with rich green tones. When encountered without context, the gemstone can seem to belong to a completely different category. Gemological testing reveals the distinction clearly. Variations in refractive index, crystal habit, and internal features separate green tourmaline from emerald with precision. Yet these measurable differences are not always visible to the unaided eye, especially when the stone is presented as part of finished jewelry. The result is a recurring pattern in which visual similarity influences classification before structural verification takes place. Green tourmaline illustrates how strongly color expectations can shape perception, particularly when the hue aligns closely with one of the most established identities in gemstone history. As the sequence continues, the next gemstone demonstrates how reputation can further complicate identification, because sometimes a mineral capable of exceeding emerald in visual performance is still assumed to be something else entirely. Ranked 6th, Tsavorite garnet, the gem that rivals emerald yet rarely gets recognized. Reputation often determines recognition long before visual analysis begins. Within the world of green gemstones, emerald has maintained a dominant cultural identity for centuries. Its name alone carries immediate familiarity, shaping expectations whenever a richly saturated greenstone appears. This strong association has created an interesting effect in the gemstone market. Minerals capable of matching or even exceeding emerald in visual performance are frequently assumed to belong to the more widely recognized category. Tsavorite garnet illustrates this phenomenon with remarkable clarity. Discovered in East Africa during the 20th century, Tsavorite displays a vivid green coloration produced by trace amounts of vanadium within its crystal structure. The result is a bright, clean green appearance that can appear highly comparable to fine emerald under neutral lighting conditions. However, unlike emerald, Tsavorite typically forms with higher clarity and greater brilliance due to differences in crystal chemistry. When observed without gemological testing, the visual similarities can encourage immediate classification based on familiarity rather than structure. The mind often references the most recognizable green gemstone first, especially when the color saturation appears strong and evenly distributed across the stone. This perceptual shortcut demonstrates how market prominence can influence identification patterns. Emerald has occupied a central position in jewelry history for generations, making it a natural reference point whenever similar coloration appears. Tsavorite, by contrast, entered the mainstream gemstone market relatively recently, meaning public awareness remains more limited despite its impressive optical performance. Under magnification, distinctions become more apparent. Tsavorite belongs to the garnet family, possessing different refractive characteristics and crystal structure compared to beryl. Its internal appearance can show exceptional transparency, allowing light to move efficiently through the stone and produce a lively return of brightness. Because a Tsavorite often displays fewer inclusions than emerald, observers unfamiliar with its identity may interpret the clarity as an indicator of a higher-grade emerald, rather than recognizing a different mineral species entirely. This assumption can persist even among collectors encountering the stone for the first time. The situation reveals how familiarity bias influences perception. Recognition does not always correspond to rarity or optical capability. In some cases, a gemstone may remain less widely identified simply because its name has not yet reached the same level of cultural saturation as older, historically prominent minerals. Tsavorite demonstrates that visual excellence does not always guarantee immediate recognition. And at the midpoint of this list, the pattern of misidentification begins to shift, because the next gemstone shows how price expectations can influence perception just as strongly as color or brilliance. Ranked 5th. Chrome diopside, the green gem that challenges price assumptions. Value expectations can influence perception long before any gemological evaluation takes place. When a transparent green stone displays strong saturation and visual depth, the mind often associates that appearance with rarity. The assumption follows a familiar pattern. Richer color suggests higher value, and higher value suggests a limited number of possible gemstone identities. Chrome diopside quietly disrupts this expectation. At first glance, the gemstone presents a color intensity comparable to stones traditionally positioned in much higher market tiers. The green can appear deep and vibrant, sometimes showing a vivid tone that resembles fine emerald under neutral lighting conditions. Its transparency allows light to pass through the crystal in a way that reinforces the impression of a premium gemstone category. Because of this visual similarity, chrome diopside is occasionally misidentified during initial observation, particularly when color becomes the dominant reference point. Observers expecting a strong correlation between saturation and rarity may unconsciously narrow the range of possible identities before examining structural characteristics. Yet chrome diopside forms through geological processes distinct from beryl or garnet. The chromium responsible for its color creates a rich green appearance, but the mineral's crystal structure belongs to the pyroxene group. This difference affects durability, optical behavior, and long-term stability when compared with other green gemstones, commonly recognized in jewelry markets. The contrast between appearance and market positioning contributes to the recurring pattern of confusion. Stones displaying comparable color intensity often occupy very different price categories depending on rarity, historical recognition, and supply limitations. When a gemstone visually resembles a higher profile species, the mind may initially assign it to the more familiar classification. Lighting conditions can amplify this effect. Under controlled display environments designed to enhance color richness, chrome diopside can present an appearance that feels unusually refined relative to its market familiarity. The visual signal appears strong, encouraging assumptions that may not reflect mineral identity. Gemological testing provides clarity through refractive measurement, hardness comparison, and microscopic examination of internal features. These objective characteristics reveal distinctions not immediately visible during casual observation. Chrome diopside demonstrates how price perception can influence identification as strongly as color itself. When expectations about rarity guide interpretation, visual cues may be filtered through assumptions shaped by market hierarchy. At this midpoint in the sequence, a shift becomes apparent. Misidentification is not always driven by visual similarity alone. Cognitive bias, influenced by perceived value, can shape how gemstones are categorized before structural evidence is considered. And the next stone introduces a different kind of confusion, one created not by price expectations, but by how language itself has blurred the boundary between natural mineral identity and modern terminology. Ranked fourth, green zircon. The name that has confused generations of buyers. Terminology has influenced gemstone perception for longer than most realize. Certain mineral names carry linguistic similarities that encourage assumptions before visual inspection even begins. In the case of green zircon, confusion has persisted largely because of a modern material whose name sounds almost identical, despite having a completely different origin and structure. Cubic zirconia, widely known as a diamond simulant, has shaped public familiarity with the word zircon in ways that rarely reflect the natural mineral itself. As a result, natural zircon gemstones are sometimes overlooked or misunderstood, particularly when the association with laboratory-created substitutes dominates recognition. Green zircon presents an especially interesting case because its optical behavior can produce a lively appearance that differs significantly from expectations shaped by the simulant commonly abbreviated as CZ. Natural zircon belongs to a mineral group formed through geological processes over vast timescales, often developing crystal structures that interact with light in complex ways. When cut properly, green zircon can display notable brilliance and strong internal reflections. These characteristics occasionally lead to comparisons with diamond-like sparkle, particularly when observed under directional lighting conditions that emphasize refractive performance. Despite this visual capability, the similarity in terminology between zircon and cubic zirconia often influences perception before the stone is examined. Some observers assume zircon must be synthetic, while others interpret the name as an indicator of imitation material rather than recognizing a naturally occurring mineral species with its own geological history. This linguistic overlap demonstrates how classification challenges are not always driven by visual similarity alone. Language itself can shape expectations, creating cognitive shortcuts that affect how gemstones are interpreted even before physical characteristics are considered. Gemological distinction between zircon and cubic zirconia becomes immediately clear through refractive index measurement and microscopic observation. Natural zircon frequently displays internal structural features that reveal its geological formation, distinguishing it from laboratory-created materials designed to replicate diamond appearance. Green zircon reminds observers that gemstone identification is influenced not only by color and optical performance, but also by terminology that can obscure the true nature of a mineral. As recognition improves, awareness of natural zircon's distinct identity continues to grow, separating the geological mineral from the modern simulant that borrowed part of its name. And the next gemstone introduces a different level of complexity, one that often requires scientific instrumentation to confirm identity with confidence, because visual similarity alone becomes increasingly unreliable. Ranked third, green sapphire. When visual identification stops being reliable. At a certain level of similarity, observation alone becomes insufficient. Some gemstones share color characteristics so closely that visual comparison provides little confidence in determining identity. Green sapphire represents one of the clearest examples of how mineral classification can exceed the limits of unaided perception, requiring analytical tools capable of revealing structural differences beyond surface appearance. Unlike emerald, which belongs to the beryl family, sapphire forms within the corundum group, a mineral species more commonly associated with blue coloration. However, trace elements such as iron can produce green hues within the corundum crystal lattice, creating stones whose color overlaps with other well-known green gemstones. Under typical viewing conditions, green sapphire may display a balanced tone that appears consistent with stones traditionally associated with chromium-based coloration. The visual presentation can feel familiar, particularly when the gemstone has been cut to enhance transparency and reduce internal distractions. Because emerald has historically dominated recognition among green transparent gemstones, the mind often assigns similar appearances to that category by default. This perceptual shortcut can lead to misidentification when structural confirmation is not performed. Gemological testing reveals distinctions that remain invisible under casual observation. Differences in refractive index, crystal symmetry, and internal growth patterns provide measurable indicators that separate corundum from beryl. Spectroscopic analysis can further identify trace element composition, clarifying the origin of color within the crystal lattice. Green sapphire demonstrates how gemstone identity is ultimately defined by atomic arrangement rather than visual impression. Two stones may appear closely aligned in hue, saturation, and transparency, yet belong to entirely different mineral families formed through separate geological processes. The increasing overlap in visual characteristics among gemstones illustrates the evolving complexity of identification. As analytical tools advance, classification becomes more precise, reducing reliance on assumptions shaped primarily by color recognition. For collectors and researchers, this progression highlights the importance of structural verification when visual cues alone fail to provide certainty. The deeper the similarity between gemstones becomes, the more necessary objective measurement tools are for accurate identification. As the list approaches its final entries, the consequences of misidentification begin to increase. Because the next gemstone introduces a case in which distinguishing natural origin from artificial treatment can significantly influence interpretation. Ranked second, natural green diamond, the color that can change identification completely. Rarity can sometimes introduce uncertainty rather than clarity. Among colored diamonds, green occupies a particularly complex position because its appearance may originate from natural geological processes or from artificial treatment methods designed to alter color after formation. The visual outcome can appear remarkably similar, yet the underlying cause carries significant implications for classification and documentation. Natural green diamonds derive their color from exposure to radiation occurring within the Earth over extended geological periods. This interaction affects the crystal lattice at an atomic level, altering the way light is absorbed and reflected within the diamond structure. The resulting color may appear soft, muted, or slightly uneven, often displaying subtle variations across the surface. Because green diamonds occur less frequently than many other color varieties, opportunities for direct comparison remain limited for most observers. When encountered outside laboratory conditions, the distinction between natural color origin and treatment-based color modification may not be immediately apparent. Certain enhancement techniques can introduce green coloration into diamonds through controlled processes. While these treatments are disclosed within professional gemological documentation, visual observation alone may not always reveal whether the color formed naturally or was influenced by post-formation methods. Misidentification can occur when assumptions are made based solely on appearance without reference to laboratory certification. The structural integrity of the diamond remains unchanged, yet the origin of the color plays a critical role in how the gemstone is categorized and described within the gem trade. Gemological laboratories rely on spectroscopic analysis and advanced imaging techniques to evaluate color origin. These tools allow specialists to detect patterns consistent with natural radiation exposure or artificial treatment processes. Such distinctions cannot reliably be determined through visual inspection alone. Green diamonds demonstrate how gemstone identification can extend beyond mineral species classification into the domain of formation history. The difference between natural and treated color represents a level of complexity that requires scientific verification, emphasizing the importance of documentation and transparent disclosure. As understanding of color origin has improved, the ability to distinguish natural green diamonds from treated stones has become more precise, reinforcing confidence in classification standards across the industry. The final entry in this sequence presents a different form of misidentification altogether, one in which visual beauty has historically overshadowed an important scientific consideration that cannot be recognized through appearance alone. In first place, French Torbernite, the crystal that looks like emerald but tells a very different story. Few minerals illustrate the limits of visual identification more clearly than Torbernite. At first encounter, the crystal structure appears strikingly elegant. Thin, glassy plates form layered geometric patterns, reflecting light across flat surfaces with a symmetry that often feels intentional rather than accidental. The color presents a vivid green tone capable of resembling the transparency associated with certain collector-grade gemstones. Because of this visual appeal, Torbernite specimens have historically attracted attention among mineral collectors who value aesthetic structure as much as rarity. However, Torbernite does not belong to the same mineral families commonly associated with jewelry gemstones. Instead, it is classified as a copper-uranium phosphate mineral, formed through geological processes that introduce elements rarely associated with wearable stones. Its presence has been documented in several European localities, including historical deposits in France, where distinctive crystal formations have been preserved in mineral collections. The misunderstanding surrounding Torbernite often originates from the way the human eye evaluates beauty. Transparent green coloration, combined with well-defined crystal geometry, can resemble visual characteristics typically associated with more familiar gemstones. Without contextual knowledge, the mineral may appear comparable to emerald-like structures when viewed in specimen form. Yet the scientific classification of Torbernite reveals a composition very different from traditional gem minerals. The presence of uranium within the crystal lattice places the mineral in a category that is studied more often within mineralogy and geology than within jewelry applications. Collectors generally preserve Torbernite as a display specimen rather than as a wearable gemstone. Its appeal lies in its structural clarity and distinctive coloration, which together create a visual impression that can easily be misunderstood when viewed without mineralogical context. Torbernite demonstrates how appearance alone cannot communicate the full story of a crystal's formation or composition. The visual language of gemstones often encourages rapid categorization based on color, transparency, and symmetry. Yet mineral identity is determined by atomic structure, elemental composition, and geological origin, characteristics that remain invisible to the unaided eye. As scientific understanding has expanded, classification systems have become increasingly precise, allowing visually similar materials to be separated according to measurable structural differences. The journey through these 10 green minerals reveals a consistent pattern. Color can guide attention, but structure defines identity. And in gemology, what appears familiar at first glance often turns out to be something far more complex beneath the surface. Color often creates certainty. Structure often changes the conclusion. These green gemstones reveal how easily visual similarity can influence identification, even when mineral composition differs completely. In gemology, familiarity can be persuasive, but accuracy depends on understanding what lies beneath the surface. The closer these minerals are examined, the more perception begins to shift. Because appearance may suggest recognition, yet structure determines identity.